Hello and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. This is the third of 6 events that we're running for Digital Building Week 2024. This session, run in partnership with Alice Technologies, is going to explore how construction optioneering can bolster your profits through the use of AI. Andy Gable, Director of Solutions Engineering at Alice, is going to show us how the use of AI as you plan, bid and build can reduce risk and produce more profitable projects. Make sure to send any questions through if you have them, as it will help us get the most out of Andy. You'll be able to watch this session on demand via the same link if you want to watch it again. It should be available from about half an hour after we finish. So without further ado, here is Andy Gable.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. We'll get started here in just a moment. Perfect. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I wanted to start off today's session by asking you all 3 questions. First, how important is profit margin to your project and to your business? Second, what are some common ways that your projects are able to increase profit margins? And third, what are some common ways that your projects lose profit margin or encounter the dreadful margin or fee erosion? Every time I ask this question, I get flashbacks to projects where I've either experienced expected or unexpected changes that occur, which just chipped away at our margin. When this happened to me, and what I've heard from many others, is that the conversation usually went something like this. Well, I'm sure we can just figure it out on site. Or, I've seen this before, so I bet we can get our project back on track. But how do you know? I was always operating off the assumption of the collective team, but oftentimes we were never aware of a better solution that existed outside of the one that we chose. The reason is because we never had a way to quickly quantify the impact of changes to our projects. Today, I'm going to show you how Alice, and specifically our latest release of Alice Core, can help you and your team minimize or even mitigate the impact of these common delays and scenarios that eat into profit margins. And we're going to discuss how you have the ability and opportunity to bolster your profit margins. Before going any further, allow me to reintroduce myself. As Daniel mentioned, my name is Andy Gable, and I lead the solutions engineering team here at Alice. I'm honored to be here today and to be representing Alice Technologies here at Digital Building Week. In my career, I've always had the title of engineer in my job roles, from project engineer to solutions engineer. While I'm not a professional engineer, I do in fact deploy engineering principles in my daily life. Engineering is the practice of using tools that we have at our disposal to solve technical problems, increase efficiency and productivity, and improve systems. To me, engineering at its core is problem solving. And at the end of the day, it's making people's lives better through the application of technology and tools. The reason that I bring this up is because I've always been passionate about solving problems and leveraging technology to do so. This is what has led me to Alice. Today, I will be introducing you to the latest and greatest release from Alice, the most impactful product release we've had since the inception of our legacy toolset. The solution we will be discussing today is Alice Core. Through this introduction, I will also be introducing you to the concept of optioneering. Now, to the title and main focus of today's conversation, how can you utilize Alice to bolster your profits? What we will talk through today is a preview of what common profit project margins are when these estimates are established. We will then look at how companies are using Alice today to optimize their projects and achieve profit margins that are sometimes that are doubled of the original estimate. But first, I'll pause. Can software actually help bolster your profits? You might be saying to yourself, Andy, that's not possible on my project because of a handful of factors. And I'm sure there are many. These are all great to keep in mind as we go through today's conversation. I'm going to pull up my screen here in a moment, and we'll get into the presentation here. All right. Okay, let's continue. So I'm sure that most of you here today are familiar with the concept of value engineering. The term value engineering is broadly defined as the method to improve the value of your project by examining the function of each item or element and its associated cost. With Alice, we have the opportunity to expand beyond this. Alice gives you the ability to understand the impact of each decision and its knock-on effects relative to cost and duration by exposing and pulling levers that impact construction production. Before we get into the software, let me tell you some real-life stories with some projects that we have worked on across the globe last year in 2023. On this slide, you will see anonymized examples of 5 projects of varying scope of work, just to give you a good sample size. These are all projects that Alice worked on in 2023. The first thing that I will draw your attention to is the average row at the bottom. Across these projects, the average estimated profit margin was originally 3.4%. Now, maybe this resonates with you. Think of the typical project margin that you have on your jobs. Now, look just to the right. See that these projects were able to, on average, achieve profit margins of 6.5%. If we move up, you will see profit margins on these projects have even been as high as 10.6%. In these examples here, we are illustrating that with the help of Alice, these projects were not only able to optimize their schedules, but also optimize their profit margin and produce quite favorable results for their business. I believe it's important to note that these projects had varying objectives, but they all aligned in a manner that allowed for profit optimization. To that point, we know that objectives can change from project to project with things like client needs, site conditions, the contract type, whether we're acting as the contractor, the project owner, or consultant, among a few. Some projects are looking to unlock incentive bonuses through acceleration, while others are looking to deliver projects by the contractual dates. Through the use of Alice, we have the ability to target and solve for these objectives, opening up the opportunity to optimize for your profit margins. So what is Alice, and why is this important to you? Alice is an AI-based construction optimization engine. In other words, Alice has patented algorithms that work with your plan or schedule and help you optimize based off of your deliverable. What this means is that Alice has the ability to consume your data and expose many different levers for you to pull that impact your project. Think of these levers as your project parameters and constraints, or commonly labor, equipment, materials, production rates or productivity factors, project sequence logic, or milestone dates. So why is this important? Because never before has there been a tool that allows you to proactively optioneer your project to test these different scenarios in an efficient and easy to use manner. Sure, you have likely seen the ability to run what-if scenarios in some tools, but let's be honest. How often do you actually run multiple meaningful scenarios, or how often do you dedicate valuable resources to complete these tasks? I was speaking with a gentleman recently who does extensive work on data centers. He told me that he and his team work on running what-if scenarios for months on end, day in and day out. The draw on his team is extensive for the results that they're actually able to achieve. Maybe this sounds like something that you experienced today. What if I told you that Alice can give you the ability to run these scenarios in a mere matter of minutes? What I'll tell you is that this was music to his ears. And importantly, in the context of our conversation today, Alice will help you improve and protect your profit margins and unlock more opportunities to successfully deliver your projects. But enough with all of this. The proof is in the pudding, right? Let's get into Alice here in a minute and see how this is applied in practice. I'd like to start off with an analogy. Alice, or the ability to schedule parametrically, operates in a tool that I assume all of you already know, any mapping tool or software on your phone or computer. The first thing that we are able to do in either tool is start with your destination. With a map, this is the address or point of interest. With Alice, this is your schedule. This is how we identify our target or what we are building. Next, we add constraints. For your map, this may be avoiding tolls or highways. In Alice, this will be defining the constraints for your project, like the equipment used or job site density. Next, we define our mode. Are we walking, driving, taking the tube? In Alice, this is where we define or set our schedule parameters. We identify the labor availability for our project, as well as review logic. Where available, we recommend removing preferential logic, which allows Alice to explore new sequences of work. Now we run our scenarios. Your maps will show you multiple paths to reach your destination. Alice will do the same. Based on the parameters and constraints in place, Alice will explore all possible permutations of your project and present the options to you that prioritize the shortest duration and lowest cost. And when things change, you have the ability to update those parameters. In maps, you may reroute due to a crash or an unexpected delay ahead. Do the same in Alice by identifying the changes and explore new paths that get you to your destination and objective on time. So let's review the Alice workflow. How does Alice work? So Alice works in 4 main steps: planning, exploring, and optioneering. And as you can see on this slide here, the way that we start with Alice is to work by uploading your initial P6 schedule. The second step is going to be to make your schedule parametric. Third is going to be to simulate and optimize. And fourth is where we can actually compare, resimulate, and export our schedules. I'm going to take one moment here just to switch my screen to a different visual to explain this in a different manner. So bear with me one moment, please. All right, get this up here. So again, let's look at this in one other way. This is the 3 steps that I was mentioning earlier: planning, exploring or optioneering, and analyzing. We'll review each step in more detail. Since there are some of you on this call that have not seen Alice before, we'll start today with the Explore page. Here, you will notice a nice scatter plot on the right-hand side. In this scatter plot, each dot that you see represents a schedule. This chart is organized with an index cost down the y-axis and a deterministic duration across the x-axis. These different colors, each color represents a scenario that has been run, which you can see on. This is where you have the ability to quickly near your projects. Here, you have the ability to create new scenarios. And this is where you can adjust key production levers for your project. You have the ability to quickly review labor, equipment, materials, and constraints or project milestones. We can for example, what if my tunneling or excavation crews worked overtime? What impact would that have to my project? We can also see the availability of equipment accessible to your project. Materials can be incorporated, and they can be brought into duration calculations, which I will explain in more detail soon. We can also review the project constraints. Constraints similar to milestones like design, permitting, procurement dates, and many more. We will explore these areas more further along in today's conversation. The third step is where we analyze. This is where we have the ability to review any of the dots from the scatter plot. During your review, you can dive into details in your Gantt chart. You can review analytics. If I wanted to go through and look at resource histograms, this allows you to see visuals on overall crew utilization to understand the demands and see any peaks or valleys of crews coming on and off the site. We can also look at things like material consumption, equipment utilization, and cost over time. Jump back to the Gantt chart here. From the Gantt chart, you have the ability to see the logic sequence between your activities, as well as resource logic Alice has generated, which you can see in the purple lines here. You also, of course, have the ability to review things like your criticality and see your critical tasks. This information is going to help you better inform yourself for the future questions that you can ask Alice to minimize the impact of these critical path activities in crews. If you're curious what has changed between schedules that you are reviewing, and if you wanted to run this against your baseline, you have the ability to quickly compare solutions, reviewing overall metrics like duration and cost, as well as parameters, allowing you to review the available crews provided to Alice and the amount that were actually utilized in your plan. Now that we've briefly discussed the process of exploring and analyzing our schedules, let's take a step back to square one. This is where we set up the initial plan. Now, what I will demonstrate here in a moment as I jump back to our starting page, in order to get started with Alice, all you have to do is import your schedule. I'll show an example of that here as I drag a schedule file into the system. So Alice Core was built to deliver great results from optioneering for your project, and it was also developed to do this with great speed. So what we're going to take a look at is loading this schedule and get into a schedule assessment. As you saw here, all we did was drag and drop our existing schedule file into Alice. From here, we can get started. Within a matter of minutes, we have the ability to start optioneering on our project. Now, we've already discussed the principles of optioneering, and we will cover this again. But before we get there, there's more that Alice is doing behind the scenes when you import your schedule. The first thing you will have the ability to do with Alice Core is identify potential project risk and work to minimize that risk. But risk is a broad term. So what do I mean by this? Generally speaking, Alice provides you the opportunity to assure and assess your schedule by uncovering hidden schedule busts, determining realistic resource needs, and stress testing your schedule. This list by no means is exhaustive. Now, how do we check for hidden schedule busts? Upon import, Alice immediately runs a feasibility check of your schedule. If cyclical logic loops or other errors that cause infeasibility exist in your schedule, you will be notified immediately. If no infeasibilities are found, or once they're corrected, you'll be taken to the plan page, which we can see here. Hopefully this experience looks relatively familiar to most of you because we will be working right from the Gantt chart here in Alice. Now there is plenty that we can do on this page, like reviewing a logic sequence, reviewing and assigning crews to activities, and making our activities parametric. I want you to keep that concept in mind for a moment, the concept of parametric. This is a key concept in Alice that we will return to in a bit. But what we're going to do now is continue to assess a project for potential risk. I'm also just going to zoom in here a hair. Now you'll see this button up top that says reschedule. When we click this, Atlas is continuing to check for feasibility and those schedule busts. If you have scheduled a milestone that is unachievable with the resources and logic that have been put in place, you will be notified and shown the plan date and the earliest achievable date for that milestone, allowing you to review the sequence leading up to that milestone and make any changes. So that is step one. That's how we start projects in Alice. It's as simple as uploading your existing schedule. From here, we move on to step two and explore our solutions. When you first load your schedule and navigate to the Explore page, what you will see is this green diamond. This green diamond represents the schedule that was imported into Alice. Think of this as a direct copy of your original schedule. Now, we know that when schedules are created outside of Alice, oftentimes these schedules can be gamified, which might deliver results that are not truly achievable. Think of situations where you resource level, or when you schedule your plan. You might be given a result with negative float to achieve your milestones or desired durations. Or resources can be over-allocated to accomplish these goals. Alice, on the other hand, will never violate any constraints. I would like to reiterate that point. When a constraint is added into Alice, it will never be violated, and Alice will give you a true deterministic duration and a feasible schedule based off of your parameters. What we can now run is a scenario with our baseline resources and logic that will resolve your schedule constraints. Or in other words, we can process a guaranteed constraint resolution schedule. We commonly see results here where the realistic duration shunts out to the right, maybe representing a longer duration schedule, showing you or presenting immediate risk for your project. Another way of thinking about it, a plan that will eventually eat into your profits. Now, I want to take a moment again to discuss the concept of optioneering. Here at the Explore page, you have the ability to start pulling those different levers that impact your construction production. Think of these levers as variables on your project that have the opportunity or potential to change. And as we know, there are a lot of levers that can impact our project. When we create a new scenario, you will be shown those project resources, labor, equipment, and materials, and again, those project constraints or milestones. These are just some of the examples of levers that you have the ability to pull when optioneering your schedule. From the Explore page here, you can manipulate any of these levers, develop scenarios based off of these changes, and quantify the impact of change from a perspective of cost and time. Now back to today's topic of conversation. This is where you can now start looking for opportunities to improve your project's profitability. Just as an example on this on this page here where we were looking at our Explore page. Again, all of these dots represent different scenarios that we have run by pulling or adjusting these project levers. Whenever I run a new scenario, we always have the opportunity to compare this to our baseline or initial schedule that was imported. We can now quantify easily the impact of change, not only from a duration perspective, but also from a cost perspective, if that is our objective. So let's continue to evaluate our schedule from risk. Here, when we are looking at our project labor, what Alice is immediately showing us are the peak labor requirements for each crew. Alice assesses all concurrent activities based off of your logic sequence, analyzes the crews required, whether it's from a direct crew import or calculations of budgeted labor units divided by duration, and displays that information on the screen here. Also shown are the minimum required resources to accomplish the schedule with the constraints that are given. So let's review two examples where the availability of labor did not match what was required by the baseline scenario. Let me reset the screen here to get back to our baseline. Now, in that example, we had our baseline resources associated. But what if the available labor resource was not what we expected? We can now run new scenarios to show the impact of that change if we had a reduction of labor. In this example, with this cluster of dots here, I now have the ability to see that our project it will be delayed if we do reduce our labor. However, on the other hand, we do have the ability to reduce our cost if this is the case, because we have a reduction of labor. This is a process that we continue to iterate on and explore all possible scenarios where our labor, equipment, and material resources are constrained outside of what is required by our initial schedule. I'll show you another example here. What if we're proceeding on our project and we had an unexpected reduction in labor? You will see that we can run these scenarios at any time. Alice is not only a tool that can be used in tendering and pre-construction, but also during course of construction to recognize the real-time impacts and model these scenarios. So in this example, we are altering our labor resources. I'm sure some of you might be asking yourself, what happens if I don't have a resource loaded schedule? If that is the case, that is totally fine. You can still utilize the import feature of Alice, and you will have the ability to intuitively resource load your plan. This process is something that can quickly happen within Alice. If you have a schedule with budgeted labor units and duration, your resource requirements can be calculated for you. If you need to add resources, you can do so with bulk applications. And I'll show you an example of that here. What we can do on the plan page is filter down to similar or the same activities across multiple work fronts. I know that I have some activities that are titled drill. What I could do is I could filter for those, and I can bulk apply resources to all of those activities. You will see here that we want to make it easy for you to assign those resources to activities to start optioneering. Now, if resources or labor in this example are not important for your project, that is also totally okay. We would then look at different levers that we have the ability to pull when running our scenarios. Maybe we focus on our milestones. Maybe we focus on productivity factors. Maybe we focus on the sequence in our schedule. These are all other examples of levers that we can pull. So let's look at another example. Another example that we can review together briefly is looking at a scenario where a milestone date is sliding. You all have probably experienced issues on projects where maybe pre-construction deliverables aren't achieved or a completion date isn't achieved as well. In order to go through and model these, all we need to do is identify the milestone, we can see the constraint type, and we can shift those dates. I'll run an example here where our phase 1 completion is delayed by 2 months. Now I'll run that scenario and that will process in the background. What we're doing here is giving Alice the opportunity to resequence activities. Now, as you're aware, a milestone or constraint can represent many things. So think of a scenario where you have a key date, a pre-construction deliverable like design completion, permitting, maybe procurement delivery that has been delayed on your project. How do you determine the downstream impacts or knock-on effects of these changes? I am all too familiar, and as we mentioned earlier in today's conversation, the adage that we will figure it out in the field. Now, while our construction teams are experts in their craft and can often accommodate these changes and find solutions on the fly, we are presenting them with challenges that oftentimes have no obvious solutions. With Alice, you have the ability to arm your operations teams with a tool that provides real, deterministic data to better prepare them for changes in plan. To accomplish this in Alice, as we looked at, simply adjust the date and run a new scenario to quantify the impact of this change. You now have a plan to mitigate the risk of these delays. Let's look back at the screen here where we can see these pulsing dots. These represent new scenarios that were run that recognize and model the impact of that change. We can now understand what the knock-on effects of that change are. And again, we can compare those solutions to our baseline. So if I wanted to see what the impact of this delay was, you can actually see from a visual perspective that we can still accomplish this plan ahead of our original duration. Again, we are presenting feasible solutions that in this example not only allow us to accomplish our project ahead of the original duration, but if we think again back to the topic of today's conversation, we can now protect our projects. We can add additional contingency that protect our profits and even give us the opportunity to bolster those profits. So we have now assessed our schedule and understood where we could potentially be at risk. So what do we do from here? How do we get our plan back to the baseline if delayed and continue to optimize to reduce duration and our project cost, which again protects our profits? This is also where we have the opportunity to again prevent margin erosion and defend our contingency via robust anti-fragile planning. In the following examples, we will review opportunities to adjust key levers that impact construction production, layer in variables that impact productivity, remove bias from our schedules, and explore alternate paths of construction to find the best plan. But I want to go back to a word that was mentioned previously, anti-fragile. What does it mean to have an anti-fragile project? What I'd like to do here is explain some of the definitions of anti-fragile. So I'm going to pull my slides back up here in a moment when they load. Let's try that again. Sorry, I'll take this opportunity while this is loading to grab a sip of water. And maybe my slides are just going, there we go. Cool. So again, let's review what it means to have an anti-fragile project. But before we do so, we should explain what it means to have a fragile project and also what it means to have a resilient project. So a fragile project. This is simply a project that breaks when any sort of risk event occurs. Think of that scenario that we just ran. Our phase one completion is delayed. A pre-construction deliverable is delayed. What we might expect from a fragile project is that if we encountered a 2-month delay, our project completion date would simply shunt out to the right by 2 months. Now, what are the impacts that this has to you and your project? Not only are you missing your deliverable, but you're now eating into your contingency, and that fee erosion is occurring. This is where profits erode. Next, let's look at a resilient project. This is likely where we see most projects today. Resilient projects have contingency, or they have float built into their schedule that will accommodate for some of these changes. Now let's look at the same example. We had a 2-month delay on a critical milestone. Maybe our project is set up to absorb this delay in a resilient manner. But what we have done is we have eroded or deteriorated our contingency, which oftentimes will lead into fee erosion. But what if our float or contingency only allowed for a month of delays? We now are again pushing out our contractual milestone. Now let's introduce anti-fragile. An anti-fragile project is one that can recover, oftentimes stronger than before. This is where we're going to look at generative project recovery. So again, let's consider the example that a key design, engineering, or procurement milestone or deliverable has been delayed. What impacts would this have on your project? With an anti-fragile project, with Alice, you have the ability to identify this shift and allow for the solution to deliver you a schedule that mitigates or minimizes the impact of this delay. This happens in the background by shuffling crews or even resequencing activities depending on your project's objectives. In other words, your project can recover even stronger than before. So how do we accomplish delivering an anti-fragile project in Alice? As mentioned a moment ago, Alice will allow you the opportunity to adjust those key levers and incorporate variables that impact construction production. This allows you to explore multiple options and find the best plan for your project. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to navigate back to the plan page in Alice. While we were reviewing the critical path of our baseline schedule, we discovered that there are multiple repeat work fronts, activities, and crews that consume a majority of the critical path. What can we change in our planning that can reduce the impact of these activities and crews on that critical path? Remember earlier, we mentioned the concept of parametric planning. Here is where we can apply that in principle. A major factor on our critical path for this project is our tunneling crew. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to filter out for all activities that include our tunneling crews. So what I can see here is that we have fairly extensive durations of 240 hours for each of these activities. What I can do now is easily explore scenarios where not only maybe we change our calendars from a 5x8 calendar, which I believe I have those hidden in this column here, but we can change these to a 5x10, a 6x8, a 6x10 calendar when we explore our new scenarios. But again, we also have the opportunity to make these activities parametric. In Alice, you have the ability to introduce a duration formula to any activity. Now, in this example, let me see if I can zoom in on this here. So right in the middle, sorry, it kind of looks like Excel when I zoom in here. But in this example, you can see that we are dividing our original duration of 240 hours by the number of crews that are available to work on this activity. Other variables can also be included in these duration formulas. I'll pull up some examples on the right-hand side here. Duration formulas can also include available equipment to work on these activities, daily materials available, task information, production rates or productivity factors, labor availability, and any sort of custom properties. So I'm now going to demonstrate how you can introduce a variable crew size to your duration formula to make these activities parametric. So again, we had a formula that is dividing duration by number of crews. What we can now do is introduce a minimum and maximum number of crews that can work on these activities due to, say, spatial constraints. What Alice is doing in the background is now exploring all possible permutations of your schedule by using 6, 7, 8, 9, and in this example, all the way up to 18 crews to work on these activities. What Alice is doing is dynamically adjusting the duration of your activity based off of the number of crews that it's applying to each of these activities. Alice is also pulling from the available number of resources without over allocating resources to any task. When I apply this to multiple activities, actually, I apologize. Let me take a moment to explain what is happening in the background from a visual perspective. When you go through and process decisions on a particular schedule, we are oftentimes led down a single path, depending on our objectives. In this example here, each of these different nodes represents a different decision that was made when we're prioritizing our schedule for duration. But what if our objective changes? What if I wanted to prioritize for cost? We're going to be led down another path that again leads us to a singular result with our schedule. When we introduce flexibility or the parametric activities into Alice, what the solution is doing is exploring the entire solution space. What Alice will present to you on that explore page with the scatter plot are the solutions prioritized for duration, shortest duration, and lowest cost. This is what Alice is doing in the background, especially when you introduce that flexibility. Now I'm going to jump back a slide here. We were talking about parametric activities. I like to pull up these 5 options to get the wheels spinning on what we can do by making our activities parametric. Let's look at each of these. First, we can increase or decrease activity durations dynamically as we run new scenarios. Alice will allocate or shuffle the available project resources amongst your activities. If we remove preferential logic, Alice will resequence the activities without violating the construction logic or hard constraints that you already have in place. We can also maximize our workspace using things like density constraints. And now we can rapidly simulate acceleration opportunities by adjusting some of those parameters. Now, again, this is all based off of the objectives of your project. So I'm now going to navigate back to the Explore page. So again, when we navigate back to the scatter plot in the Explore page, we can produce new solutions that represent the changes of our parametric and flexible schedules. Let me isolate our baseline again and show you some visual examples. Earlier today, we were looking at a restriction of available resources to work on our project. you can see that this has shunted out our project duration past our baseline. Now, by making our schedules and activities parametric, by removing our resource logic, by removing preferential logic, and by introducing the flexibility of resources or assets on our project, we can now pull back to our baseline. We also have the opportunity to accelerate beyond that. In some of the examples that we talked through today, we mentioned introducing things like overtime. We can see the impact of those changes. But you can also see that when we introduce those parametric activities, we now have more opportunities to reduce our duration and minimize our cost. In these recent examples, we've explored how we can prevent margin erosion and defend our contingency via robust, anti-fragile planning by adjusting the key levers that impact construction production, layer in variables that impact productivity, remove bias from our schedules, and explore alternate paths of construction to find the best plan. This now allows you, again, to protect your profits, defend your contingency, and improve your profit margins. So we don't have too much time today to continue exploring different scenarios, but a natural next step from here is to continue with that concept of value optioneering. In this, you have the opportunity to simulate different means and methods, test different design concepts for feasibility, optimize specific resources even further, and optimize for goals such as milestone completion. We can also continue to quantify the impact of pulling different production levers and reviewing the difference between plans. This allows you to find the best plan suited for your needs. Soon, we're going to open up the Q&A section. But before we do so, let's just recap what we've discussed today. We started today by reviewing the three main steps in ALICE: planning, or importing a schedule, exploring, or optioneering, and analyzing our schedules. You were introduced to ALICE Core, which fundamentally changes the planning process by allowing you to import your existing schedule file and jump straight into optioneering. I showed you some examples of how you can identify risk by checking your plan for feasibility, uncovering hidden schedule busts, stress testing your schedule, and testing your plan for common risk scenarios. We then looked into strategies for preventing margin erosion and defending your contingency by establishing robust and anti-fragile projects. ALICE Core was built to accommodate the workflows and tools that you already have in place today. By doing so, we were able to find optimization on even more project types and sizes than before. We are trying to provide you the ability to optioneer your plan and deliver results that allow your projects to develop in ways that meet your project objectives and help you increase or bolster your profits. I hope today's session was helpful for everybody here today. We here at ALICE are all excited to introduce you to ALICE Core. If you found any of this interesting, I encourage you to visit our website or book personal demonstrations where we can look at your schedules within the solution. I want to just grant a big thank you for everybody here participating and a big thank you to the team that has put this on. It's been a pleasure speaking with all of you today, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Daniel, with that, I will hand it back over to you.
Thanks so much for that, Andy. Please keep your questions coming. We've got a bit of a Q&A. I'll start off by asking whether there are any particular industries or types of job which are and whether there are other areas where its capabilities are limited or challenged.
Yeah, so the question there is kind of what project types do we focus on with Alice? Now, in our past, we have focused on the biggest and most complex project studies here that I'm able to share, so I can pull these up in a moment. But the reason that I say that we started our focus there is we wanted to tackle the most complex projects in the world. Now, with Alice Core, we have really expanded the opportunity to work across many or all project types or segments. That said, we work in the industrial space, the infrastructure space, the light industrial space. Think of chip manufacturing facilities or data centers. We also work in commercial or life sciences. So we have the opportunity to expand the solution across all industries. The reason that we can do so now, again, is we can get started with a simple schedule import and run those optioneering strategies based off of your project objectives. So in summary, there's really no limitation to the projects that can be run in Alice. The prerequisite is to have an initial schedule. And from there, we load it in and run those optioneering strategies.
So a lot of possibilities. What are the main obstacles you would say to the adoption of these kinds of AI tools in project planning and bidding at the moment? Are there issues that need to be overcome, maybe on the client side?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. One of the things that we often will discuss with folks is what is that learning curve to get up and running with Alice? The nice thing with Alice Core that hopefully you saw through some of the presentation here today is that the work environment is really similar to what people are used to today when it comes to scheduling. We have the ability to work from that Gantt chart perspective. Now, where the learning curve comes into play is really looking at the concept of optioneering and testing those different strategies. We see people that are really used to running what if scenarios and going through that manual, daunting process of adjusting things on a task by task level, a crew by crew level. Alice gives you the opportunity to speed up that process and get to those results a lot faster. So, the main learning curve in Alice is really understanding what questions do I want to ask. Alice is a deterministic solution based off of the inputs that you put in. So Alice doesn't ask the questions for you. I'd say the main learning curve there is, right, what questions do we want to ask? And typically we see folks leaning on their previous experience, past projects that they've worked on, or real-time project delays or risks that they're experiencing. So again, in summary there, we're working from the Gantt chart, so the user experience is very familiar. The main learning curve is really understanding what questions do we want to ask. And again, we have a lot of industry knowledge across all companies, not just at Alice, but also all of you on what some of those risks might be.
What would you say are the main concerns you hear from clients when they first hear about Alice? Are there any reservations that are common for people to bring up?
Yeah, there's one that really sticks in my mind, and that is resource loading. The term resource loading it's scary to a lot of people. A lot of people are immediately intimidated. I don't know if that's the right word for this, but also just resource loading is a really daunting process, and it's oftentimes in the past led to issues with schedules. So I'd say that that is probably the first thing that comes up in most conversations, and typically around the thought of, I don't resource load my schedules today. How can I still utilize Alice? And if resources are not loaded, that is not a problem. What we can do is we can assign assets to particular tasks in Alice if that is your objective. And we have a lot of different strategies there on how that can work and how it can benefit folks. But also, the labor resources is not a requirement. We just look at different levers that we can pull. And maybe we focus on milestones. Maybe we focus on our sequence logic. So there are other things that we can do if we're not looking at the resources. But I'd say that's probably the number one and most common concern that comes up is my schedules aren't resource loaded. Again, that's not a problem. We can still focus on other areas of optimization.
Mm-hmm. Great. And sort of looking slightly more broadly, are there any concerns or limitations you think might come up from increasing reliance on AI in the construction sector? Are there any pitfalls that we should be trying to avoid there in terms of sort of from a governance perspective, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a good question. From the governance perspective, what I will point out with Alice is I know that there's a lot of concerns with AI in general today. Oftentimes, those concerns, from what I have seen, stem from data protection or data security or what's happening with my information that I'm feeding into the system. All of our clients, I think all of our clients typically operate under NDAs, so they want to make sure that their data is protected. All of that said, we operate our AI in a little bit of a different way than people might be used to with AI that's in the marketplace today. We don't pull information from large models, and we also don't send your information back to large models. All of the information within the solution that we're running is specific to your project. So we're not going through and sharing that data. So as far as a governance perspective, all of the information is secure. Now, Daniel, to the start of the question there, what are some like the main concerns that people have with AI as well? Again, I think what people are experiencing with other AI tools, I won't name any names, but you've seen a lot in the media these days, is that oftentimes AI can hallucinate. Oftentimes AI can generate solutions that aren't trusted or feasible. Again, we operate in a little bit of a different way. All of the information that we're looking at is specific to your project. So the constraints, the parameters, the solutions that are run are all project specific. So to that end, we deliver deterministic results that are adjusting for your parameters. And we have not experienced those hallucinations, again, because we're not pulling information from the entire source of the internet, trying to make it specific and very accurate for your jobs.
Great, that's very reassuring, I'm sure. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, though, today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you've all found it as informative as I have. Once again, you'll be able to get the session on demand via the same link as you used to access it. If you want to watch it again, it should be available from about an hour after we finish. When this finishes, you should see a little survey come up. If you could fill this in, that would be very appreciated. It only takes about 30 seconds, but it's a big help for us. Tomorrow is the last day of Digital Building Week. We've got our first event of the day at 11 o'clock in the morning, and that will look at leveraging data to maximise asset lifecycle management, and will be chaired by our editorial director, Chloe McCulloch. So hopefully you can join us for that. We've also got a session at 2 p.m. on digital innovation for enhanced building safety compliance. So thanks everyone again for watching, and have a nice day.
Thank you all.